Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for February 18th, 2025. Well, the Europeans are moaning in a meeting in Paris. There's a summit coming to take place in Saudi Arabia, which will include Russia and the United States. There's an Arab summit that's going to be taking up the rebuilding of Gaza. And you also have Zelensky warning that Russia is about to march on Europe. This is just another day in the saga of the end of the empire, the beginning of a new era. Now, what happened after the last week, as we reported yesterday, is that the Europeans were completely thrown off by these speeches given by Defense Secretary Helga Zepp in Brussels, followed by Vice President Vance in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. The press in Europe described the European leaders as having been gobsmacked by strategic shifts. Now, what do they mean by gobsmacked? Well, the British press uses that to describe extremely shocked and surprised and or distressed. And that's what we saw happening coming out of the meeting. Telling the truth about Europe, about its censorship policies, about the lying, about the commitment to war, about the avoidance of negotiations, all of that which was brought up by Vance, especially the censorship and the lying and the exclusion, all of that caused the Europeans to go into a total snit. And so Macron and Schultz and Starmer called for a meeting in Paris. And they met and talked, and they came up with a conclusion. They don't know what to do. And Macron said there's a need for a follow-up meeting and maybe a whole series of meetings. Now, what Vance did was, which was called a blistering talk, was he just laid out the truth about what Europe is doing, that they're excluding discussion. They're, in the name of democracy, they're overturning elections. And he said that this is unacceptable. Now, at the same time, Hegseth laid out the conditions for peace in Ukraine. And what did he say? He said that there would be no return of land to Ukraine. He said there would be no consideration of Ukraine joining NATO. He said that if there were peacekeepers put in Ukraine after the ceasefire or the agreement was signed, that this would not be a NATO mission and there would be no U.S. boots on the ground. Furthermore, what was clear is there would be no European participation in the talks between Russia and the United States on ending the war. Now, this clearly rattled them to the extent that they had no idea what to do. So what did they do? They had a summit where they consoled each other and talked about the importance of Europe playing a role. But Sergei Lavrov actually explained why there's no need to have the Europeans involved. Lavrov said, quote, "I don't know what they would do at the negotiating table. If they are there with the aim of continuing war, then why invite them? Well, good point. Why have a peace conference with people who want to continue the war?" And the Europeans now are convinced that what Zelensky is saying, and Zelensky's just falling back on Biden and Starmer talking points, which is that Russia intends to reconquer Europe, that Russia's possibly weeks away from an invasion of the Baltic countries and Poland and possibly Finland. You know, this line has been out there since the beginning, since the Maidan crisis, that you have to watch out for Russia. In fact, it goes back to the reason that they decided to expand NATO to the east, because of the fear of what they call the imperial tendency of Russia. And this is what the British have been focused on since the time of the American Revolution. And so they spread these lies and slanders that Putin wants to restore the Soviet Empire, that there's a Russian impulse to empire. This is rich, isn't it, coming from the British? So these talking points are obviously either fully believed by the European leaders, or they're so committed to the policies of protecting and defending the special interests of the military-industrial financial complex, that is, of the empire, which is collapsing, and so brainwashed by the ideology of geopolitics that they see no alternative to war against Russia. And this was, of course, the policy of the Biden administration. And this goes back to Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and his warped view of the world, which was passed on to his protege, Madeleine Albright, who passed it on to her proteges, including Tony Blinken. So that's what the deal is with the Europeans. So what do they talk about when they meet? How aggrieved they are, how they feel left out, why they should be playing a role. Why, look how much money we've spent to help Ukraine, almost as much combined by Europe as the United States. Now, first of all, that's not entirely true. But secondly, what does that show? It shows what suckers they are, how stupid they were to sacrifice the well-being of their populations, assuming that Starmer and Macron and Schultz and the others actually care about the needs of their populations, that they're willing to throw that out the window in order to stay on the good side of NATO by joining the attempt to weaken or destabilize or break apart Russia. So that's why they have nothing to say. No, there was one thing they said. Starmer offered to send British troops as peacekeepers. I think the Russians were probably laughing about that. Now, clearly they want to sabotage the peace, but at what cost to their own citizens and to their own future? Now, meanwhile, Lavrov has arrived. He's there with Putin's foreign policy advisor, Yuri Ushakov. Rubio is there with Mike Waltz, who's the national security advisor to Trump, and the Mideast envoy, Steve Witkoff. And they're going to begin meeting today to discuss the whole panoply of U.S. Russian relations. What Peskov, this spokesman for Putin, said is it's not just Ukraine they're talking about. They're going to focus on restoring the entire complex of Russian-American relations. And he said also they're preparing for a Putin-Trump summit, and which will include negotiations about Ukraine. So this is putting an end to the Biden-Blinken strategy of no talks, no diplomacy between the U.S. and Russia. A deep freeze in relations. Well, that's ending. Now, there's also significant motion in the Mideast, with the Saudis, the Egyptians, and others taking up the proposal of coming up with a better plan than Trump's plan to remove all the Palestinians from Palestine and build golf courses and casinos on Gaza. There's a conference in Cairo, I think it's tomorrow, on how to rebuild Gaza. Egypt, the Saudis, the Arab League will be there. There's another one coming up later in the month. The important thing is that there is a plan, which is our proposal for the Oasis Plan, a water project which would provide benefits for both Israel and Palestine, as well as for the neighbors. Fresh, clean water, greening the desert, expanding overall availability of electricity, changing the climate. You're worried about global warming? Well, how about more water? How about greening the deserts? This is the way it should be done, because the question that's really posed here is what will provide the benefits to the Palestinians and the Israelis that would be an incentive for them to lay down their arms, give up their grudges, and become two nations like any other nation. So with all the ins and outs and the opinions being put forward on the internet, my advice is stay focused on the big picture. And the big picture is the collapse of an empire based on geopolitics, based on looting, based on the private interests of a military-industrial financial complex. And this is an era that existed for 500 to 600 years. The European neo-colonial era. It's not going to just fade away. It has to be taken apart and replaced by something better. So the new paradigm that has to come into existence that has to come into existence cannot be based on expediency, what's easy to do, but on principles. And the cooperation of nation states for mutual benefit, that's the guarantee that a peace will be sustainable. So I'll be appending again the fundamental principles that were drafted by Helga Zepp-LaRouche precisely for this discussion. How to replace short-term pragmatic solutions which never work with long-range principles that reflect the relationship between man and the physical universe. That's how you get a peace. And that's what the Peace of Westphalia was based on. That's what we need today. So share this video. Help us make these videos go viral. Get more people discussing these fundamental principles. Forget about sports and entertainment and sex lives for a bit and focus on this big picture. Join us to do that. So thank you. See you again soon.